every time a gender-based violent post goes viral, social media platforms are making money off it. The more ridiculous a post is, the more it's going to stir up emotions, whether negative or positive, the more the algorithm is going to push it.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the show. I'm Cecilia Maundu. I'm a broadcast journalist. I'm a digital security trainer. I work at the intersection of technology, human rights, and journalism. Welcome to another exciting and informative episode of Digital Dada Podcast. Today we are going the legal way. We are going the law way. But before I introduce my guest, this episode has been made possible by the Association of Media Women in Kenya, which is AMWIC. AMWIC is an association whereby, as a female journalist, you can be able to join the organization. They have amazing resources on their website, and most importantly, they are very invested and taking a lot of charge and advocacy in the issue of tech-facilitated gender-based violence. So welcome to the show, and I will give my amazing guest an opportunity to introduce herself. It has taken years to get her here, but finally we are here. Yes, welcome to the show.
Cecilia, it's not been that long.
It's been that long, God knows.
Just scheduling conflict. Confirm it is scheduling conflict.
Okay, scheduling conflict.
I'm Mercy Mutemi. I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for having me. I've known Cecilia for, wow. If I say the number of years, I'll feel older than I am, so skip.
Yeah.
But I'm a lawyer by training. My expertise is in digital rights and internet governance, so I take on cases at the intersection of law and technology. And how I like to describe my work is that I try to figure out what our digital future as Africans needs to look like. How do we make it fair? How do we make it equitable? How do we make it just? That's what I try to do. And that comes in the form of taking cases that either are looking for policy change or restorative justice for people who've suffered, especially now when you're talking about technology-enabled gender-based violence. I represent clients who've been on the other side where they've been violated in indescribable ways by technology and try to see how to achieve justice while also pushing for legislative and policy change so that other people don't suffer the same. Yeah.
So you're trying to also make tech companies accountable?
100%. I try to describe it from the perspective of users and Africans in general. While there's this new branch of law, which is like tech accountability, I think when we describe it as tech accountability, we're still very focused on the platforms taking center stage. And I'm really trying to deplatform the platforms and center people. So it's not about tech accountability, it's about protection of people. And oftentimes it will lead you, yes, in holding tech companies accountable, in holding them liable, but also in holding governments liable. So this is not a fight, a charge against tech companies. This is a charge to protect people. That's how I describe my work. So while there's a lot of intersectionality with tech accountability, it is not just about tech accountability. It's about how do we make sure this person, whether they're a user of social media platforms or they're just caught in the crossfire of social media harm, they're centered, they're protected, and they're put first. That's what I'm trying to figure out.
You are the perfect guest for this show, for sure. And I will dive to my first question. Are tech companies legally required to implement safety features, content moderation policies, or user protection mechanisms?
Whew. How much time do you have? Because this is a very complex question.
In the interest of time,
yes,
just give us the most important nuggets out of
the
that.
shortest answer and the clearest answer is 100% yes. There's a legal responsibility on tech companies to clean up their platforms. Simply put, I think it's not just enough to say that. I think you need me to point out to what we mean by where this legal responsibility arises. And I always begin with the Constitution because Kenya, South Africa, and other post-colonial countries have the advantage of having constitutions that center human rights. And that is a big plus. And in this new age of the digital era, it is something African countries need to take advantage of, because you don't see the same in the US, you don't see the same in the UK. They have old constitutions that don't recognize human rights as part of their constitutions. But I digress. So if you look at the constitution to begin with, the right to freedom of expression is entrenched in it, right? And that's in the constitution in Kenya. It's also in the Universal Declaration. We all have a right to express ourselves across whatever medium. That's what the African Charter says, across whatever medium. Whether it's the internet, radio, kamkunji, all of it is right to freedom of expression. But famously, in that right, there are restrictions. And there are very clear-cut restrictions when it comes to freedom of expression, propaganda for war, incitement to violence, which is where gender-based violence comes in, right? And also just discriminatory language, hate speech, for example. Those are clear-cut exceptions where the Constitution tells you freedom of expression does not extend to these categories. Okay. So you take that provision and you look at social media platforms, they fame themselves as the providers of this medium of providing free speech. Yes. So if you think about what Zuckerberg announced the other day, is like, oh my God, we've been curtailing people's right freedom of expression. We're even going to slow down on content moderation to support freedom of expression. But to support freedom of expression means you're taking the responsibility to observe the laws on freedom of expression. Key of which is you do not promote and you do not benefit from categories of speech that are forbidden. Let's take the example of child abuse, right? Very famously, child abuse is forbidden across all the platforms. There's that inherent responsibility. We can't say, oh, everybody has a right to speak anything, so here's child abuse, you should allow it. No, we say there are restrictions to this because when it comes to children, they're a protected sector. So it's the same thing when it comes to forbidden categories of speech. Platforms make money off the content we share. Just remember that. They are not giving you a free platform. They're in the business of selling advertising space.
That's their business model.
100%.
Their most important person is their advertisers.
Exactly.
Yes.
And what are they selling to the advertisers? They're selling eyeballs, right? So if a post goes viral, they're making so much money off that post going viral because all the adjacent adverts, and you know how strategically nowadays adverts are placed.
Exactly.
They're even overwhelming, whether it's on TikTok
Even
or on
X.
It's so I can't even tell like when I'm looking at an advert or when I'm looking at just a social media post. But that means every time a gender-based violent post goes viral, social media platforms are making money off it.
And you know, there's a time I read somewhere, Mercy, and they said they really like the chaos because that is their all-time high.
Yes.
That's when they're clocking in the profits with every second.
100%.
Yes.
When we study the algorithms of social media platforms and how they're structured, the more, it's called the virality factor, right? The more ridiculous a post is, the more it's going to stir up emotions, whether negative or positive, the more the algorithm is going to push it. Like, it needs to be viral for it to even go more viral, so to speak. And the study that was done in Germany, especially on the members of parliament in Germany, was that during campaign period, they realized when you stick to safe campaigning, where you're not insulting people, the algorithm doesn't push your content. You have to literally be violent to make your post go viral. So they benefit from this kind of content. So then I take you back to the Constitution. If the Constitution is saying that these categories of speech are not allowed, why is a company making money off these categories of speech?
And you know, the algorithms are the kingmakers.
Yes.
Okay.
So if you ask me if there's a legal responsibility, that right there is your answer. I mean, there are other perspectives to it in which you've signed a terms of use contract with these platforms. But even in those terms of use, they say explicitly we don't allow harassment. So even from a contractual point of view, you have a legal responsibility to protect me from harassment because I logged into this platform knowing that you don't allow harassment. Yes. But I think the more overarching conversation is the Constitution, and that's the case we have in court against Meta. That's the argument we are making, that when the Constitution says it doesn't allow these kinds of content, can it then be okay for Meta to be making billions in profits
out
of the exact same content. No, it's not. Yeah.
And that leads me to my next question. What legal standards exist in Kenya regarding content moderation and harmful digital content?
Yeah. So Kenya is a wonderful place. Let us start there. It's a wonderful place in both directions, right? We have
It's a double-edged sword.
It's a double-edged sword because the constitution, we have, I think, one of the most progressive constitutions.
Yes.
And I follow Waikwa Wanyueke on X, and I
Yes.
think he puts it very aptly in terms of how powerful this constitution is. It is, I don't remember the word he uses, but you cannot mutilate it. Like these small attempts by the government to mutilate it, it will always bounce. And I always agree with that statement because of this. The same country keeps legislating towards curtailing freedom of expression outside of the provisions that are allowed in the constitution. For example, the fake news thing, right? So we have a huge problem when it comes to gender-based violence online. Let's
Yes,
first
take
agree that.
facility, yes.
And the biggest victims are women who are in powerful positions, who go for political powers, journalists, anybody. Simply put, if you ever make a good argument on social media, the first question will be, who sleeps with you at night? If they forget about the argument you're making, they will try to take it there.
It becomes more gendered and sexist.
And how many times have women been doxxed, for example, on X, right? Like, this is where this person works, embarrassing them. Now we see even sharing of intimate images. Now it's even gone to the next level because these images are not even authentic. They're
deepfake now.
They're
We're
deep
talking about
fakes.
AI
Exactly.
and deepfake,
And this is being perpetrated against women. There isn't a legislative framework that expressly covers that unless for the constitution, which guarantees you your right to dignity. So it is possible if you came to me as a lawyer and said, I've gone through this form of violence, I will get you justice through the constitutional process, right? But it would be easier if there's an administrative process that protects people, right? For example, we have not fake news, but hate speech. Hate speech has been legislated on, right? There's the NCIC, the National Cohesion and
Integration.
There you go. I always miss that I. The NCIC law that forbids hate speech. And by the way, even in that law, social media platforms have a responsibility in that they've created an offense where if you're a platform and you carry hate speech, you're also liable. I don't know why it's never been implemented, right? But you see, every time there's been a hate speech element, of course, it has become politicized. It's used to fight people who are against the government, all of that. But I want you to see the ease with which an administrative process helps. Every time there's been hate speech perpetrated at like 9 p.m. news, it's been broadcast. The next morning, NCIC has summoned someone. And they've gone to court for criminal charges. Do you get that? So to have that facilitative law, yes, it's in the constitution, but without a facilitative law, it means you always have to go to court and fight over 2 or 3 years to just get justice, when you could just get justice through a different administrative process. So we don't have that clear-cut framework where we say, okay, when someone has suffered violence, this is where they go. That is the gap.
And you know, that is the thing that has really been coming up with in our conversations in the spaces that we are in. We actually had a meeting the other day with Amwick, and one of the things that came out very clear, the laws are a bit vague when it comes to the issue of cyber harassment, and most of the victims don't know a clear path on how to go about seeking justice. So, and as we are on the topic of TFGBV, and we are talking about cyber harassment and everything. So what challenges do survivors face when seeking legal resources for this kind of abuse?
Lots of challenges. I think, first of all, it's the re-traumatizing. Intimate violence is very difficult to fight against because it involves you putting yourself out there for more violence, right? Like a lady who's fighting, or a gentleman who's gone through this form of violence, who's fighting against this, whatever has happened to them, has to go on record and literally recount what has happened to them. And our judicial process, these records are public records, right? And that always leads to more re-traumatizing. It's almost like people now want to make you regret the choices you've taken. So traditionally, legal redress is not approached from a perspective of care, where we're not, I can't just go to court and hide your identity. I have to actually fight for your identity to be hidden. And that really puts off a lot of people from pursuing justice, because you're like, whoa, to be exposed now to 40 million people when I was just exposed to 1 million, I'd rather just...
It's like reactive, what? Is they always say like online violence is amplified by victim
Yes,
shaming.
exactly.
Yes.
So that's the first challenge. But the second challenge is how we tackle these cases against the platforms. For example, the issue of deepfakes and Telegram, like this. So Telegram isn't in Kenya, and Telegram isn't in the US, and Telegram isn't in EU. It is actually in Dubai. So that right there is a legal nightmare, because you do need to hold them accountable, but they're in Dubai.
Yeah.
So that it's normally, I feel like we have a body of law that has given us a good footprint on how to pursue justice for companies based in the US and companies based in the EU. But this is uncharted territory where you see players who are traditionally not problematic players coming into the field. So that becomes a challenge. It's surmountable, and it is definitely something that can be dealt with. I'm just warning you that like it's one of the challenges that people face, right?
Yes.
Yeah, of course, then there are other issues like, the cost of this, and finding people with the correct expertise who can actually understand what is happening to this person, who can do proper gathering of empirical evidence that can be presented to court and not challenged, is always a challenge.
So I would want you to talk more about when you talk about people who have expertise on this.
Yeah.
There's a time I attended a training. That time I didn't know for sure. And one of the things they said, there must be forensic evidence because of this issue of artificial intelligence, deepfake. You can't just say, oh, here is... No, it has also to go off. So I was like, oh my goodness. So... Okay, I understand because of the issue of AI and all that, but that means another hurdle.
Yeah.
And also the people who are doing that, it's called the forensic audit, they're accountable. They're 1, 2, 3,
100%.
Yes.
100%.
So at the same time, I was like, oh, then how we keep telling the people who've been abused, make sure you go the legal way, make sure you report. But now when you such issue, they tell you sometimes you just decide, you know what, it's better just, I hope that is going to disappear, and we keep moving forward. But if we don't have enough data, how are we going to inform policy?
Yeah, it's really the conundrum, and it's almost like a chicken and egg situation. You want enough people to come forward and take action to force legislators and policymakers to take action, but then there isn't a proper framework for people to seek justice. So then you're always making these experimental trials with people's lives and exposing them to re-traumatizing over and over again without the promise of success. I think it would be different if you came to me and I told you 100%, I'll get you 100 million in 3 months. Just sit tight, right? It would be very different. A lot of people would feel free to come forward.
Yes.
I've had conversations, for example, with several people who've been victims of these ones were not like victims of deep fake sexual violence. It was just intimately photos that had been shared in an intimate setup, and then when there's a breakdown in the relationship, your significant other shares them out to other people, and then it go viral, and now people are making fun of you.
Yeah.
And when you have a realistic conversation with them on what justice looks like, they just say, let me go to therapy instead and deal with this issue. And it's very disheartening for me, because I do know that there's a path to justice. It's just not clear-cut. It's not straight. It's not easy, and it would traumatize you. And that is just the reality of it at the moment.
Yeah.
So what it would need is, from the side of the judiciary, is to come up with a framework to protect people who have already undergone these forms of violence. Right now, we file everything on e-filing, which means if I want to produce evidence of somebody's nudes being leaked, I literally have to upload the nudes.
Imagine.
And there isn't a framework where I could opt out of it without going to court and getting an order, which takes like 3-4 months. So the way we've structured our judicial system it's effective for traditional justice. It doesn't respond to the kinds of violence and the kind of harm we see from a technology-based perspective. And even from the research perspective, harvesting of evidence is a completely delicate process. It's not impossible, it's delicate. And I'm having to tell clients, go to the group where your nudes are being shared without your permission and take photos of the violence that is being perpetrated and document it. And I want you to realize how ridiculous that is. I have to re-traumatize them, because if it doesn't come from them, if it comes from you or from someone else, then we cannot verify, we cannot produce forensic evidence and say, okay, this is actually not altered. And that's crazy.
And it's good you've mentioned, because there's an online harassment manual by PEN America, and they say one of the things they encourage people, if you can't document it yourself, tell someone close to you. But now in the case of the law, you have to do it.
Yeah. The thing is, our evidence law is quite funny. It says you have to account for the chain of custody in a very pedantic way, which means you have to say how that photo was harvested. So then there's this other whole aspect of hearsay, right? Where it has to be primary evidence. I have to have seen it. So if Cecilia sends me those photos, then am I not risking those photos being tossed out of the court record for being hearsay? Because I never really saw them. I need to say, like, primarily, I can verify for sure. So it's figuring out. I think part of my job has now become figuring out how to game the system to protect people who've already been victimized. And I think it's quite an unfair call, to be honest. I think there should be a way we can achieve justice without, having to jump around. I mean, think about how ridiculous. Okay, if that's a case of people who've gone through that kind of violation for voluntarily taken pictures but not voluntarily shared, think about the deep fakes. And right now, there's a booming business, I assure you, of young girls whose photos are just being taken from Instagram. You're posing fully clothed, very innocent. The next thing, you're in that X group, so-and-so has you decided to unite Kenyans, your nudes. And you're like, I never posed for nudes. So imagine going through that kind of violence and then still having to jump the hoops. Even from a criminal justice system, it's not very clear to the law enforcement what they can do to protect you. They understand the harm, and I've related with a lot of them, and they understand the harm. But then, okay, who do they hold accountable for these things? The platforms are not here.
Yeah.
You ask them to give you the address. They consider African countries to be other. So they don't even respect requests for information from the Communications Authority of Kenya. So we're in this conundrum where harms are happening and people are making money out of the harms, and there isn't a clear-cut way to achieve justice. But I say this to just set the reality, not to give people a reason to give up, because we're doing it. Mm-hmm. That has become sort of my mission now, to figure out legal solutions where there don't exist legal solutions. And luckily, we found a very responsive judiciary, a judiciary that understands the Constitution and that understands that platforms are not private entities to do as they wish and to deal with people as they wish. We just had a good decision 2 weeks ago against Bolt, the driving company, because these platforms, they deal with the drivers and with everybody very unilaterally. They just change things. They don't even inform you. And the judge has literally this time around said, no, absolutely not. You're affecting people's rights by doing unilateral action. So there's a way, and we will figure it out. It's just we're at the early stages of figuring it out. And unfortunately, a lot of people who are already harmed will continue suffering in the interim.
Until further notice.
Yeah.
And that also brings me to this question. When it comes to the issue of law enforcement, how equipped are law enforcement agencies and the judiciary in handling digital gender-based violence cases?
It's a complicated question. They get it, but they may not have the tools to do what they need to do. So the rumor has always been, our cops don't understand it. Actually, the DCI office gets digital violence.
I'm
They
one of the
actually,
people who says the cops don't understand it.
no, they do.
No, I do. Okay.
They do. The problem is the people who actually get it are few and far in between. So if you walk to some petrol station, a police station somewhere, and they refer you to their DCI, that person might not be the person who has undergone that training and understands what's happening. But someone somewhere gets it, right? So I've had conversations with a few DCI guys who actually get this. The thing is, if I don't have the tools, doesn't matter what I know and what I can do about it. So there's in it a conversation that needs to be had on how much investment is going towards enabling our law enforcement to deal with these kinds of cases. Even if they understand the issues, they don't have the tools to do whatever they need to do, right? So that's the first perspective. On the part of the judiciary, a judge is a person who can deal with any kind of case, as long as you've explained what the case is to the judge. The gap there is lawyers being able to articulate this very complex thing in a very simple language to a judge in a way that the judge will understand. Because at the end of the day, there's nothing new here. The constitution is the constitution, the provisions are the provisions. You just need to be able to relate them in a digital world. So it's more training on the lawyers to understand how to present these things. If it's about evidence, how do you break it down to that point? Because we've fallen to the trap where we sort of accept that the internet is a mysterious place. So we present our cases in terms of this huge mystery, you know. Yes. So like when I say Cecilia has been harmed on the internet, I just say Cecilia has been harmed. And it's like, but you still haven't given me evidence. And that's why you see a lot of these cases being dismissed. Yeah.
And now cycling back to the point where you talk about these tech companies not being liable, because one of the things is they're not in, that they're not in Kenya. There's a certain CS who said they're going to make sure that these tech companies open offices here. Will it do any different? Will it bring any difference to the situation?
So first of all, to clarify, they can be held accountable even when they're not here. What it just makes it harder to hold them accountable. So those are very different things. Okay. Like the court has already ruled, it has jurisdiction over Meta and other big social media platforms here in Kenya. So liability, that one the courts will always have. It just makes your route towards justice much longer, right? So the thing that worries me about that approach is the India example. India came up with a law that says if you want your social media platform to be used in India, you have to have local offices in India. And then passed another law that says when the government tells you to pull down content, you have X number of hours to pull down content. And if you don't do it, your license to operate within the country is going to be cancelled. And very famously, an incident that took place when X was still Twitter is that the government issued, I think, 32 posts that needed to be pulled down during the, I'm sure I'm going to misquote it, but it was the farmers' protest in India. And a lot of it was against activists who were in good faith communicating about the protest. And Twitter pulled down, I think, 5 and then said, the rest do not violate our community standards, and to do so would be to affect freedom of expression. Then study what happened next. Twitter was raided. And they were being held literally at gunpoint to pull down the content. Tell me that doesn't sound like something that could happen here. Do I need to say more?
No.
Exactly.
As we come to the tail end of this conversation, what policy recommendations would you suggest to enhance legal protections for victims of tech-facilitated gender-based violence and hold platforms accountable?
What we need is we have a legal framework in the Constitution. We just need to make it settle in administrative laws that now give effect to those provisions, right? We understand that right now, for example, gender-based violence is a huge thing, especially technology-enabled gender-based violence. So you just need a legislation that crystallizes the right to dignity, because the right to dignity already exists in the Constitution, right? The right to privacy exists in the Constitution. You just need to crystallize that right. We don't crystallize it in the Computer Misuse and Cybercrimes Act model, which, when politicians hijack a bill, They destroy even the good intent, and that is exactly what happened. Now we ended up with a legal instrument that just handles with fake news. It's like very disappointing.
Just to tick the box.
Exactly. But it's, first of all, it's legislation that crystallizes that and provides an easier way of achieving justice, including even offices. Social media platforms don't have to be physically here to have accountability offices, for example. In using the example of data protection frameworks, you just have to appoint who do we report to when someone has gone through this. And in the Kenyan framework, if someone goes through this, we need you to do 1, 2, 3. You just need to have a set of rules on this is what happens when people go through this kind of violence. So it's just legislation that is needed to crystallize the right, because the right already exists. And people already have in the Constitution a way to advocate for their rights.
Okay. So last question.
Yeah.
These tech platforms, do Kenyan laws require tech platforms to provide transparency reports on online abuse, harassment, and how they respond to user complaints?
Well, the law doesn't expressly say that they can. Our parliament is powerful enough to require that. You've heard about, for example, parliamentary inquiries in the US and in the EU. And, well, Meta is not in all the countries in the EU. It's just in one country in the EU. It's in Ireland only.
Yeah.
Yet, you see, I think I'm wrong. It's in several other countries in the EU, but you see them also responding to requests to parliamentary bodies, regulatory bodies in other parts of EU, because you have that power. And in this country, for example, if you think about how content moderation is done through an agent of the social media platform. One of the conversations I had with parliamentarians last year was, you're complaining that TikTok doesn't conduct content moderation effectively, but content moderation for TikTok in Kenya is taking place in Westlands. And you're not calling the agent who is doing content moderation to ask them questions on how they're doing it. Like, does that make sense? No, so you already have the power. We're dealing with it as if it's this difficult thing to do. I'm like, but the people who are doing this work are in Kenya. Even the algorithms themselves are being trained in Kenya. You just need to summon the agents and ask the agents, what is it that you're training these algorithms? How come they can't pick up hate speech in Kikuyu? Then you have the answer. And one of the things that, if very effectively, and this is just my theory, you could do is peg licenses on such things. Like, if you want to continue operating in this country, even as a BPO, as a business processing outsourcing company doing work for TikTok, 10% of the work that you do needs to be local content work. Number 2, you need to make sure at least you've regulated this kind of content and you're doing a better job. You need to employ more people to make sure that the platform is clean. One of the examples I like to give is that at the peak of the petition for banning TikTok from Kenya, because of the lives, the 3 a.m. lives,
the 2
where people
3 a.m.
exactly
lives,
where people would go online and basically just have live sex and
all that. Yeah.
At the same time, because I represent a lot of the content moderators, the ones who used to work for Facebook and also for TikTok, they were telling me on the other side, do you know at 3 a.m. I am alone on the floor? I am the only TikTok moderator on the floor. There are 3,000 lives going on. How am I supposed to pull down 3,000 lives alone?
And they are being overworked. You know, I saw that documentary.
Exactly.
They are being overworked.
So, and the solution is very easy there. Like, why are we saying, oh, TikTok needs to come and establish an office? No. TikTok's content moderation is happening here. Call the guys who are doing the content moderation. Ask them, what is the problem? Fix it. It's as easy as that. They don't need to be complex solutions, because these are things that we actually have the grasp for. And just the fact that content moderation and algorithm training work, literally the training for Tesla self-driving cars is happening in Kenya.
I didn't know that.
It's 100% is taking place in Kenya. Yet,
Silicon Valley of Africa.
Yet, we're not having conversations with Musk and telling him, oh, if you're going to do your training work, then you also need to build our industry. Nothing. We're not having those conversations. It's very short-sighted.
So is it by intentional, or maybe the people who are in those offices don't have an idea about it?
there's a whole intellectual property conversation where they don't want you to know that the work is happening here because they always feel like, oh, someone will come and steal our intellectual property. So there hasn't been a lot of transparency. A lot of these companies that call themselves call centers are not call centers. They are algorithm training hubs and content moderation hubs. And there's a very big failure on Parliament's end because Parliament has the power to actually audit and to carry out investigations and to find out what are these people really doing, right? So it's as easy as just asking these companies, what exactly do you do? Open the blinds. Who do you work for? And then let's have that conversation. This work you're doing, when ChatGPT was launched, ChatGPT algorithms were being trained in Kenya. For like 3 months, ChatGPT had no idea who the Kenyan president was.
Well, I'll check to know if they know.
I'm sure they know now. But that is the level of ridiculousness we're talking about.
Okay. I think, as I'm sitting here and listening to you, I'm like, oh, wow, I could listen to you forever. But in the interest of time, we have to bring this conversation to an end. Thank you so much, Mercy. You are oozing so much wisdom. And I mean, I've learned so much from you. I think also we should do a part 2 of this. That is if I ever get to find you again.
Oh, but, shut up. I am very available. I am very available and call me. I could talk about this all day long. I'm passionate about it, so let's definitely have a part 2.
Definitely. So thank you so much for coming. Viewers, thank you so much. I'm sure you've learned so much. And as I said, this conversation has been made possible by the Association of Media Women in Kenya. I urge you to check out their website. And they are doing a lot of work on advocacy, research on the issue of tech-facilitated gender-based violence. Again, asante sana. Be safe on the online platform and see you in the next episode.